Good morning. Get in here, world. The sun is up. Bitcoin is running. Got a nice hot coffee. I'm going to talk about the news. Lots going on. The first story I want to cover today comes from a fella named Mark Stein, who has been, since the pandemic started in 2020, has been running a regular series. It was 100 years ago today. And he had a really amazing summary of what happened in October 1922. And he reminds us in October 1922 that fascists were on the streets of Italy. There was a military call up in Russia. There was a currency collapse in Germany. And America had its first female senator. She shattered the glass ceiling. And we haven't heard much about this first female senator. And I wonder why. I looked her up. She had a pretty interesting background. It turns out she was the most prominent woman in Georgia during the progressivist era. So she's a progressive, right? They called her progressive. A lot going on right now in Georgia when it comes to progressives and elections and all that kind of stuff. It says here she was born in November 1922. Or sorry, she was sworn in November 1922, but she had been, declared that she would get the role a little bit later. She was 87 years old when she got it, right? So it was kind of ceremonial. She held it for one day. They gave it to her for one day. This happens sometimes when there are elections. Sometimes staff take over from the senator if there's a few days left. That's happened before. So she was the first senator ever. She was the first senator from Georgia, and she was the only female senator in Georgia until Kelly Loeffler became the senator in 2020, who I knew. She ran backed the Bitcoin exchange that the New York Stock Exchange owns. And when I worked in New York City, I was regularly in the stock exchange. I used to do TV hits from there all the time. And funnily enough, I got to meet her when she was just there. They had just bought, they bought the building. There's like an office building connected to the stock exchange, and they didn't know what to do with it. They were just sitting there because they actually live in Atlanta. They don't live there. She owns a WNBA team as well. Amazing. So she was the first female senator. Just fun, I only mentioned that because it was funny that I knew her. I helped I helped the announcement to launch Backed in 2018 at an event that I organized, and it was a pretty interesting talk. And she did a great job. So, what happened to this other female senator? What happened? Why don't we hear more about her? She was a prominent society woman. She was an advocate for prison reform, women's suffrage. That's what she got it for. Oh, but wait a second here. She was also a white supremacist, the real kind, and was a mega slave owner and spoke vigorously. They say vigorously, not just in favor of, but vigorously in favor of lynching. So I guess I know why they're not bringing her up today. But it happened. It happened. And it actually makes me think of the whiteboard. We've come to the whiteboard right away today. Come right away to the whiteboard. And what this whiteboard is trying to get at is the old expression that politics are downstream of culture. So politics are downstream of culture. So, of course, no one would think that a progressive today would have ideas that overlap with this lady. Of course, they've broken apart. However, it reminds me of the trickle down effect and how once culture is set on a path, if it doesn't arrive at this political moment and there's lots of chances to sort of get off the stream in the meantime, then things can change really quickly. And another story today kind of reminds me of that. And so we'll move from politics quickly into another field, and that's Hollywood. And I want to talk a bit about Hollywood today. So the first story I have about Hollywood today that's related, I'm going to tie them together. You're going to tie together, is She-Hulk. So I haven't watched it. I sort of gave up on a lot of this Marvel stuff, and I guess there's a new Lord of the Rings series out as well. I gave up on that as well. When I saw the Star Wars sequels a few years ago, I kind of had enough. I didn't really like what I saw. There was just a missing piece of resistance, let's call it, like character arc where someone has to go through something and learn something and suffer. What I saw in the last Star Wars show was a character who just seemed to have everything going for her and she just did everything great. And I've sort of seen that story a bunch of times now. Someone comes in, beats everybody up, and they got nothing to learn. And I think that's what the She Hulk story is also getting criticized about. There was very little, let's call it payoff in character development, and a lot of things that were just sort of put in place. And a lot of people think it's one of the worst TV shows ever made. Now, again, you don't look at me for the reviews. I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it. All I know is the reaction. And there was apparently a big meltdown on Twitter last night. Um, one of the actresses had a quote. And so one of the fans said, terrible show, and there's never going to be a sequel. And she came in and said, well, I got to make all of this great work, and I got to meet all my favorite Marvel stars, and I got to go on a press junket, and I got paid for it, and it was wonderful. I personally, as an actress, had a great experience, which is, and I believe her, right? And I'm a fan of this actress. She's on that show. I saw the first few seasons, The Happy Place, and I thought she was great. Very beautiful woman. The show really is a smart show about how heaven is this, in their world, like heaven is really like an accounting game, and if you're good you get in, and if you're bad you don't get in, and but the accounting's all off, and it was a fun show. I really like it. And so another actress in this She-Hulk series. And right away it starts to remind us that if culture doesn't actually get fans, if it doesn't get people to tune in, it's not really going to do its job and start influencing politics very much. Because if people don't watch it, well, it didn't happen, right? If you tweet something and no one sees it, did it happen, right? If you make a movie and no one sees it, did it happen? If you make a podcast and no one sees it, did it happen? Right? Not really. Like, if you don't get enough attention, it just didn't happen. There's so much competing interest right now for people's attention. Attention spans are so small, so everyone's after them. And if you can get a bit of it, you can turn it into money. But if you don't get the attention, if you don't get the engagement, it's just not going to happen. So apparently the ratings for She-Hulk are, just bottom of the barrel, some of the worst ratings out there for TV shows. Again, I'm not so up to date on it, but the context here then becomes this. If politics are downstream of culture, what's informing that culture? So until now in this fiat world, like, remember what this actress said, like, I got paid, and she was kind of mocking a fan. Did you get paid? You didn't get paid. I got paid, right? And as if that was the point of making the show, right? She-Hulk was a beloved character. They made the show. It sort of alienated the fans who didn't really see the character that they had wanted in the representation. And as I understand, the creators of the show had never read the old comic book, which they said was a good thing because they could add a fresh aspect, a fresh narrative to it. So sometimes that is good, right? Sometimes that's good. But in this case, it didn't work out so much, and people didn't show up. So here's the thing. The old druidic religions, the old where Merlin comes from, and where all of these old, not Christian religions, not from the Middle East and all that stuff, sort of the early European stuff, the pagan stuff. In the ancient druidic cults, they, of course, had wizards, magicians. And the actual wand, the magician's wand, comes from that ancient faith. And they would sort of tell the congregation what's going on, and they would use this wand. And the orchestra conductor in European civilization is a direct inheritor of that culture. So when you see the orchestra maestro doing this, that comes from the ancient religious practices of Europe, pre-Christian religious practices of Europe, when they were druidic, and the wand of the Merlins or the other folks were a sign it was time to listen and then you should follow the wand. Does anyone know what these wands were made of? If you watched Harry Potter or read the books, as many people did, I was a huge fan of the books. I still think J.K. Rowling is one of the best writers ever, right? She told a limited narrative from the third person of the character of Harry Potter. If you read the whole series, not the movies, if you read the whole series, Harry Potter is literally in every scene, right? That's very hard to do, to create a whole world from one person's point of view. The opposite would be the omnipresent narrator who just knows everything. She didn't do that. It was a real innovation if people didn't know that. She was able to do that. So going back to Hollywood, do you know what the wands, remember what Harry Potter's wand was made of? It was a big part of the story. It was made of holly and phoenix feather or whatever, right? But the holly is the important part. Remember that all druidic wands were made of holly wood, right? All druidic wands were made of Hollywood. Coincidence? Probably, but anyway, we've got Hollywood now. And Hollywood, of course, is a big business, right? A lot of money injected into the system, and it really is culture, right? And if you look at the way Hollywood paces and leads, you start to understand that when money is injected into this sort of cultural apparatus, it's in fact a type of hypnotic brainwashing tool, the same way a conductor would be, right? TikTok is the best thing we've ever, it's much better than Hollywood at this, right? So it engages your brain on a subject, paces you, leads you, and then can basically, once you're opened up, can give you any type of information. Myself, definitely not immune to. There is no human immune to this, right? This is like getting the operating system to do what it's designed to do, right? If you see certain images, associations, your brain will simply follow it. There's no off switch for that. Right? We know there's no off switch for it. There's protection. You can get yourself away from it. There's all those kinds of things, but off switch, not exactly, not built that way, right? So Hollywood can get anyone. There's no one immune to it, right? There's nobody immune to the effects. You can step back, you can deny it, you can reject it and get away, but nevertheless, if you fall under it, right, you see a good movie, at the end of that movie, they can sell you almost any product, right? They can on almost any idea, right? And our brains are so trained in this way now that people can't see the difference between Hollywood narratives and Hollywood endings and not, right? So we often wonder why Stephen King or Carl Reiner, if you follow or hear about them on Twitter, everyone knows who Stephen King. Carl Reiner was the guy who made maybe my favorite movie of all time, maybe Stand By Me. It was a Stephen King novel called The Body adapted into a book. And it's one of the greatest movies ever made. I mean, honestly, one of the greatest movies ever made. Carl Reiner, or Rob Reiner, sorry, not Carl Reiner. Rob Reiner made it. Rob Reiner, he's got Trump derangement syndrome, the same as Stephen King. And someone asked someone asked, how could these people say such nonsensical things on Twitter? They seem so smart in real life. How could they be the victim of every hoax in the world? Like Stephen King came out and, he was crying when Brian Stelter got fired from CNN. Like, oh, it's the only show I watch. So, no offense to Stephen King, but or I guess in this case, Brian Stelter. But if you think Brian Stelter is like the end all be all of television news, you are hugely misinformed, right? This guy did not know what was going on in the world. Objectively did not know what was going on in the world. You could gain no value from watching this guy's show. It was just something that was on TV, like Baby Pablum. So Stephen King, Rob Reiner, what makes it that way, right? Well, because they do see the world in narrative, because they do see the world in terms of stories. There can't just be a gun on the table in one of their books. If they write and the gun was on the table when you walked into a room, and then a chapter later, the gun's coming back, right? It's going to get used. He's not going to put a gun in the table. Whereas in real life, sometimes there's just a gun on the table, right? You see it, you observe it. It doesn't necessarily have to come into play in the narrative. It doesn't. Only if you see the world in those terms of narratives, right? So that's how Hollywood really operates, right? And it just to show you, I mentioned Rob Reiner and Stephen King because even the people using the wands are susceptible to the power of the hypnosis, right? If your brain only sees narrative and must see narrative, it will see narrative. It will create it, right? That's how a lot of these things become so easy to perpetuate, lies and whatnot. So We see with She-Hulk and now Lord of the Rings, these are really two huge cultural properties, Marvel, Lord of the Rings, being completely rejected by fans, completely rejected. So what ends up happening is if you get the culture piece wrong at a certain point, if you get the culture piece wrong, the buck can actually stop here. You don't get to introduce all the other ideas and perpetuate things all the way to the political level. And I think that's what we're starting to see. It looks like that's what we're starting to see. So if you turn the page just for a second from what's going on in Hollywood and we bring it back to the real world, we can start to see this logic. Now, we had Secretary of State Blinken. If the simulation isn't winking at us when we've got a Secretary of State called Blinken. Blinken, if you're blinking all the time, you got this, it reminds me of like, I'm not sure, I have some anxiety. Are people going to believe this? Is this going to pass? So he goes yesterday and he congratulates Brazil, the people of Brazil. He congratulated the people of Brazil on holding a successful first round of elections, and they share the confidence. The second round will be conducted in the same spirit of civic duty and peace. Okay, well that's not a bad idea. We've got two Blinken stories today, so we're gonna go through them both. So Blinken comes out and says, great. This is great. Better do as well as you did last time in the election. But let's just put this in context. So first of all, Glenn Greenwald reminds us that it took just a few hours to deliver the full election results of a country whose population is almost the size of the United States. And they have compulsory voting, by the way. Everyone must vote. So over 200 million people. So I guess, a little over half of America's population, but it's a substantial amount of people. And they were able to conduct their entire vote within hours, right? They had the full results. And you've got to now wonder how it is that the United States can give congratulatory advice on an election well run when it's been years that America has been able to declare a winner so clearly after the election. You might say, 2016, that's not true. No, not 2016. Remember, 2016 election was discredited immediately after and for a long time, just like the 2020 election, right? A whole group of people did not believe the results of the 2016 election, as do many people in the 2020 election. 2012 election, 10 years ago, yeah, sure. I'd say most people were pretty convinced that Obama easily beat Romney. So here's Blinken saying, congratulating Brazil. Oops. Says I've got a bit of a stream problem on one of my things here. Some of your streams. Let me have a look, guys. I'm going to find out what's going on. Well, hopefully we're okay. I think we're back. Great. So let's go back to Blinken for a second. So Blinken, has this, not very credible congratulations. It's just political, right? He's supposed to do that. Congratulations, right? But definitely people criticized him and went out and said, what are you talking about? You can't even do this stuff. Well, what do you mean? Now we see Blinken as well. He was asked in the same press conference what he thought about Nord Stream. And remember, no information out of Ukraine and Russia, none of my sources, you should believe them, right? I know some people there. I knew Boris Nemtsov before he was assassinated by Putin, and I know a few other people there, especially in Ukraine, because a lot of early Bitcoiners, I think it's the country with the most Bitcoiners in the world. And, I know some of them and have known them for years. And so he comes in and says, on Nord Stream. Now, remember that the US intelligence agencies have been saying maybe Russia, and their excuses. Well, he wants to show what he can do, that his reach is beyond his borders. The logic is he would blow up his own stuff to show that he could blow stuff up outside of his borders, right? That's the actual logic, right? Or that he needed to show that he he was going to not live up to his financial agreements. And so he had to blow the pipeline up so that it would give him an excuse. And so that people would still think he's a credible counterparty and business partner, right? So this is what they're going with. But Blinken came out yesterday and blinked, right? He said he tipped his hand, right? No poker. I guess what I'm saying is with the name and the simulation, Blinken, right, has a terrible poker face, believe it or not, right? Blinken, the guy who's blinking, has a bad poker face. And when they asked him about Nord Stream, he said, this is a big opportunity for the United States. It's a big opportunity for the United States. And he's right, it is. It is a big opportunity for the United States. So intent in there, we don't know. But he did mention what a lot of people think is a big opportunity for the United States. So, and then if you compare his theory, right, he didn't qualify any responsible parties. He just said it's a big opportunity, right? Which is a fair answer. But his theory, compare his theory to every other theory out there, and which one makes more sense to you? Right? Blinken, the Secretary of State's theory about what's going on in Nord Stream, is a big opportunity for the United States. Energy companies, or the other ones. I think it's him. But again, we've got to remember, and the whole point of this discussion is to remember that this downstream thing can break apart, right? It can break apart easily. When the culture isn't strong enough, when no one watches the movies, when no one watches the shows, when no one can be influenced and hypnotized so that the other elements actually fall in line all the way to the political level, and that Hollywood itself doesn't, right now it's been dollars, and then this whole stream is literally like a Universal Studios theme park ride, right? Hollywood literally takes you from beginning to end and is actually even able to prescribe political choices given this, right? You've been softened up so much that almost all these stories are political in the end, right? Almost all of them are political in the end. She-Hulk has politics. Lord of the Rings has politics. The new Lord of the Rings, I heard that they went to Numenor, which is like where the human ancestor society comes from, and they're all workers' rights, and it's like a mini, are we going to be communist or not? Unrecognizable to people who read previous prequels and everything about what Numenor in Lord of the Rings was like. So that's why I haven't even bothered, right? But here's the important part. Here's the very important part. When you hear about the news media and its ability to conjure, and not just news media, culture, right? Its ability to conjure this type of hypnosis to introduce other ideas to push politics, it doesn't always work at the psychological level, right? Because culture, if it affects you in any other way, if you eat, sleep, warmth, shelter, all these other things are so much more primitive than what's going on here, right? So much more primordial. Fear will beat any one of these motivations, right? Interest and curiosity and ways to waste your time and spend your time. And we can see it right now. So this is from Michael Schellenberger, who I recommend all of you always follow. Michael Schellenberger, I think, should be the governor of the state of California. I would vote for him to be the president of the United States. And he's not making a candidacy yet, but he was a candidate for governor of New York, for governor of California. It didn't work out, but we're going to keep trying with this guy. So here's what he has to say, and it's all about the hurricanes, right? So this is what he has to say. These are tweets of his. Over the last week, the mainstream news media claimed that hurricanes are becoming more frequent and intense, but they're not, as the data clearly shows. What's more, it's clear that the media are engaging in deliberate misinformation. These aren't innocent mistakes. Consider the article in the Financial Times claiming that hurricane frequency is on the rise based on data from NOAA. But NOAA says after adjusting for a likely undercount of hurricanes in the pre-satellite era, there is essentially no long-term trend in hurricane counts. He goes on, in fact, NOAA writes the evidence for an upward trend is even weaker if we look at US landfalling hurricanes, which even show a slight negative trend beginning from 1900 or from the late 1800s. Bottom line, we conclude that the data do not provide compelling evidence of a substantial greenhouse warming-induced century-scale increase in, frequency of tropical storms, hurricanes, or major hurricanes, or the proportion of hurricanes that become major hurricanes. And against the best available science, the news media unleashed a hurricane of misinformation using the exact same manipulation of data. The quantity of pseudoscience and journalistic irresponsibility is breathtaking. And now it's clear that the activist scientists at the UN are working with Google to control the information available on climate change. This is dark and chilling stuff. And this comes on the heels of a UN official just a few days ago saying that we own the data, we own the narrative, right? We own the narrative. And of course, there's no lack of movies out there that are really putting a religious tone. So that's in French, it's even more explicit. So when we say greenhouse gas effects, in French, it's les effets de serre. Les effets de serre. Remember that. So they say les effets de serre. When you, in the Catholic religion, in French as well, don't do the right things, right? You burn in l'enfer, hell, right? You burn in l'enfer. L'effet de serre, l'enfer. You're going to burn in both, right? You'll burn in the greenhouse, you'll burn in hell if you don't do these things. So you can see right away that narrative always gets injected in this way. And we saw a religion around the environment become a reality that flowed out of the system, right? And now that we see that military is clearly in line, right? That energy interests and other interests can actually push the military to do its bidding. We see that the opening is now right. That culture being trickled down from just money, is a multi-lane road. And that's where Bitcoiners have a real role to play, because nature abhors a vacuum. We're going to talk about that a lot on this show going forward. Nature abhors a vacuum. And when this doesn't work, when people don't watch She-Hulk anymore, right? When they hear a story about, oh, the world is getting worse because you didn't recycle and all these other things, you have to use less energy, right? You got to win the battle of hearts and minds to make that stick. And people don't really want to hear about how they don't have enough energy, right? So here, if Bitcoiners are going to take over, and that's why the culture of Bitcoin is so important, right? It's not just an intellectual exercise in proving that there's more money in the system. Because remember, like, the system's already bankrupt, right? There's never going to be someone who calculates it all and says, shit, we borrowed too much money, bro. It's done. It's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. We're in an event-driven economic cycle. It's not data-driven at all. That's why this show doesn't care about data. There's no data. All the data is garbage. All of it. There's no good data out there on the economy, on the environment. It's all garbage. Garbage, just useless. Can't be used. And if we think that these institutions are going to self-perpetuate without people involved, well, another thing's coming, right? And that's why Bitcoiners, with this void, with a focus on culture, with a focus on actually creating good art, with actually creating good education systems, and our events. That's I say it all the time. That's why events in Bitcoin are so important, because people getting together and having fun helps this cultural aspect, right? It's what helps you get to the downstream part where you actually can control the political institutions. So, right now, with this wavering, complicit relationship between money, Hollywood, and the military creating a political reality, the money's not really doing its job. Hollywood's not really doing its job, right? The military's still doing its job, right? They did what they had to do. And many people can agree or disagree with what happened in the Baltic Sea. The truth is, it's done already, right? And American energy companies look to be the main beneficiaries of what's happening. Blinken is 100% right, and I do not disagree with him here. This is an amazing opportunity for American energy. It also shortens the distance for Bitcoiners to get to the political thing. We just got basically a motorboat to go down the river, gas-powered motorboat to go down the river, because it looks like we don't even have to take control of Hollywood institutions and all this other stuff. If we get control of the energy companies, we can get control of everything, right? Everything, it looks like. So that's what we got to do, fellas. We got to go out and get control of energy companies. How do we do it? Well, we'll talk about that on other shows. I think the nuclear reactor financing is a big part of it, but all of it, all the efficiencies, just being able to show the energy companies how to make money and how to save their energy might be enough. So we're on our way. We're on our way. Let's make sure we didn't have too many troubles with the stream today. Let me see if there's any chat. There we go. Good. Hey, Huru. Missed the beginning, but you're on point as usual. I still bother with them because the politics inside are really important. That's what's being injected into the majority brains. Yeah. Look, the ability to, we've never seen manipulation at this scale, right? It's never happened before. This is a brand new, even the one I'm talking about 80 years ago. Right? We're up against and it's worse. It's not just Hollywood anymore. I'd say TikTok is more effective at what Hollywood showed they could do. TikTok is like this brain part and then leading you down to politics. It's if you think Bitcoin has a straight road with the energy companies, like I just mentioned, TikTok is on a whole nother level. Basically, they shorten the distance between politics to like right here, and it's even like the monkey part of your brain, right? Like the animal brains. That's where they get control of. Much more sophisticated than Hollywood. Hollywood, these are like old-fashioned, literal, Merlin people at this point compared to what TikTok's offering up. So we got to be very, very careful. It's not an open road. So and then the politics. I mean, they're heavily involved in TikTok now. They get it. I don't even think they know the power they're dealing with yet. I don't think they do. I think Trump was in the last election, if you remember, in the United States, Trump tried to ban TikTok. He had Microsoft buy it and all that stuff. And where did that all go? Right? You had an actual candidate for the presidency asking to censor an app, and it just got forgotten about. I'm not for censorship, but gosh, I was for getting rid of TikTok. For now, I don't. If you want to create another TikTok that isn't controlled by China, I'm 100% for that. But if you do the math here, it looks like China can just determine who the next president of the United States is if they do it right. If you count the number of kids that are addicted to TikTok and generational voting and all that kind of stuff, it's the greatest magician wand that ever existed. It's not even close. Not even close. Not even close. Better than rock and roll when it comes to, and rock and roll was good, right? Rock and roll really, anything that gives you lyrics that rhyme is going to hypnotize you and basically take over your brain. If it's good, right? It can make you think almost anything. So, so that's what's up. That's what's up. That's what we got today. Let's see if we got any more comments. I still haven't figured out how to see. Let's see what Guru says. Yeah, he says true. Yeah, I think I'll never have the heart for TikTok, but totally agree. Yeah, I don't have the heart for it either. I've resisted most of these small attention span shrinking things just because the phone has already, sort of devastated my attention span. I think like everyone, right? I think we're all dealing with this attention span change, and it's like an unspoken about major issue. So I'm doing my best to keep some of my attention span. We're not doing too great, right? Part of what I do this show for personally, the part that's personal to me is the attention span that I make a lot of predictions in life, and to have a record of them so I know how often I get it right, and to have people tell me when I get it wrong, that's really important to me. And also just to be able to speak coherently for about one subject in a way that has a beginning, middle, and an end, and has some kind of logic to it is just like exercise. It's like lifting weights, right? That's what I get out of this show. It's kind of like lifting weights, and if I'm able to say something that makes sense, then I'll have got the exercise I need for the day, and hopefully my time, my ability to have focused attention stays functional and useful. So that's what I'm going for. And if we're right about stuff with Bitcoin, then I believe we will be able to get to a point where these attention spans can increase again, because time preference, I think, really falls in that, right? I think this whole piece of time preference is so important to the culture of Bitcoin, because we start to understand the effects of this dollar culture and what it's done to us and what it's done to our attention spans. And we got to get out of that, because you're way more susceptible to brainwashing. Crew goes on, I tried to get something I'd heard on Twitter Space, but forgot to write all the details. Basically about Bitcoin hash rate being mainly controlled by AWS and our favorite 3-letter agency. Do you know anything about it? Ethereum too, apparently, but we don't really care about it. Something I heard on Twitter Space, but forgot to write all the details. Basically about Bitcoin hash rate being mainly controlled by AWS. Yeah, the AWS piece, as I understand, is way more important on Ethereum, especially with the MEV, the miner extracted value piece, which is fine if you're a quant trader and you get, a little bit of extra latency advantage over your competitors. But that's the divide that I always maintain between Bitcoin and Ethereum. Ethereum kind of anticipates Wall Street to just continue the way it has, and financial engineering to continue the way it has. They never asked if financial engineering just goes away, right? So if we don't need financial engineering because you make money easy to save again, is there still a reason to have so much financial engineering and financialization? So that's obvious to a lot of Bitcoiners, not necessarily to Ethereum people. I'd say what's not obvious to Bitcoin people is that maybe there is still room for some kind of Wall Street thing, but where Bitcoiners will never, I think, get on board is that only the sophisticated counterparties, the stakers, the people running nodes, really have a chance in Ethereum, just like in Wall Street, right? So the AWS piece, I don't think that's the case in Bitcoin. I've never heard anything about that, because it's my understanding that most Bitcoin miners don't require that plumbing and propagate the blockchain on their own, but I might be wrong. I've never heard the AWS piece in relation to Bitcoin in my life, but I could be wrong. It would take a lot of coordinating to make it so, though, because most of Bitcoin's hash rate was actually established since China kicked out the miners and all the machines had to go somewhere. And I, was sort of involved in the scramble to plug those machines in that, living in Quebec and knowing some of the companies involved. A lot of folks asked me if I knew where to plug machines in at the time, and people said, well, if you can get this many machines, then I'll pay you. So I was motivated to look around to put machines in. Nothing ended up converting in my case, but I was on the phone with some miners and folks saying, hey, got some machines. So it was pretty haphazard. I can't imagine anyone being involved from a coordinating point of view on that. It was just people looking to make money and not lose money and all that stuff. So from my perspective, from where I was plugged in, and these were pretty big folks, right? I'm on the phone with the biggest mining pool in the world at this point. So that was, they were involved in it. So a lot of that stuff going on, but I don't know the whole answer about it. Looks like they got yeah, I saw the Nevada thing. Looks like Nevada's politics might be changing a little bit too. So paying attention to that. All right, team. That's all I got for today. See you tomorrow for another episode of The Breakup. All right, guys.